Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me for Cybersecurity Awareness Month is Koryak Uzan, Managing Partner of PRODAFT, Keung, Partner at J2 Ventures, and Eric Shinabarger, Corporate Attorney at Winston Strawn. We're here to discuss comprehensive solutions for cyber teams to play offense and defense and how privacy and security regulation is advancing. It is great to have everyone with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And Koryak, let's kick it off with you talking about the cyber threat landscape in general. What are some of the ransomware tactics that stand out most to you?
Amazing question. In terms of when it comes to ransomware, there are a couple of different tactics. The first thing that I would like to emphasize is the risk of supply chain. Right now, most organizations are quite reinforced when it comes to their investments. However, the companies that they are working with, their supply chain, their providers, their different products that they are using, different services that they are outsourcing, they started to become a threat. They started to act as a backdoor because, for example, when you mean to target a bank, the bank itself is quite secure. However, if you target their, let's say, card services provider or transaction provider, that becomes an easier target. So that's what we started to pick up. So instead of going directly to the companies, we see their suppliers becoming a threat. And in fact, most of the critical attacks that we have seen were all resulting from these supply chain threats, which is the biggest issue at the moment. For example, the SolarWinds attack that we have seen last year was supply chain. Nearly all of the attacks that we have seen on larger critical infrastructures were all resulted from one vulnerability on a VPN provider. So this is the most riskiest point when it comes to ransomware.
Yeah. And Christine, when you think about it, over the past 10 years, a lot of the technologies that companies are deploying to improve efficiencies in their product lines and so forth are the same technologies that bad actors are leveraging as well. So what are some of the trends that you've noticed when we think about the evolution of cyber and tech as a whole over the past 10 years?
Absolutely. I definitely think there's an interesting future of work angle here, right? Especially with cybersecurity, because cybersecurity sits at the intersection of people, process, and technology. But it is really important to understand the changing landscape of how organizations have been structured over the past 30 or so years. There is a ton of buzz around how AI is going to affect human organizations. Sam Altman recently said that we are going to see 10 billion or 10-person billion-dollar companies and perhaps even one-person billion-dollar companies. And so I have actually been thinking about what security should look like for leaner organizations, right, with more human accountability, greater productivity, and a rapidly growing attack surface because of AI-enabled outputs.
Right. And Eric, of course, with these emerging technologies, privacy and security regulation is growing exponentially as well, which adds another layer of complexity for enterprises.
Yeah, absolutely. Companies right now have to stay flexible. The landscape is shifting so dramatically right now that companies have to be really agile. And the days of putting a privacy policy on a website and then revisiting it once a decade are long gone. There are now 5 comprehensive state privacy laws that have gone into place already. The number will grow beyond 20 within the next 2 years and counting. And so companies really need to understand their data flow, engage in active data mapping. That'll help with the privacy compliance aspect, but it also is a cybersecurity tool as well, because holding data that you do not need is just waiting for a bad guy to get in and take it. And so decreasing your footprint and just understanding your data, making sure that your security tools are very tailored to the data that you have and how it's flowing through your organization is really important.
And Kirk, when you think about the geopolitical targets, are there different regions around the world that are more vulnerable than others?
Sure. And we have seen it. I personally seen it. I've seen the leaders of threat actor groups instructing their team members to particularly pick specific types of targets from specific regions. And these regions are, in their own words, UK, US, and Europe, and particularly the insurance market, health market, financial organizations and these particular verticals are specifically chosen. There are multiple reasons with that. There are multiple reasons behind that. First of all, I mean, these are the countries and these are the verticals that usually pay the ransom more than the others, most probably that being one. And secondly, I really think that there is also a strategic aspect behind it. I don't want to over speculate on this matter. However, we have already we seen that the state-sponsored actors or different political agendas are sometimes piggybacking some groups which are financially motivated. So it's two birds with one stone. So basically, when a particular type of threat actor attacks a particular vertical with a financial motivation, they get what they want, they get ransom payment. However, the data itself is sometimes becomes a valuable thing for other motivators of that particular attack. So the things that we have recently observed in both UK and US, most health organizations, most hospital groups being attacked were all intentional. So it was not chosen by chance. It was all intentionally chosen for their value and for their strategic importance, I think.
Of the data, yeah, for sure. And we're going to get into that more with Eric in a moment. But Christine, when you think about the role of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, how that has evolved, and not just because of trying to manage the risk and have a bird's eye view across all the verticals with the enterprise, but there's a lot of bloat in the security market, and the tech stack is just so big, and that opens up vulnerabilities to the supply chain. To Koryak's earlier point, how has the CISO's role evolved?
So I think the CISO's mandate is actually growing, right? Even as I anticipate the organizations and the corporate structures of the future even if the employee footprint increases, the CISO's role is not going to go away. And I do think that CISOs are struggling to manage the large portfolio of point solutions that they currently have. And they are actually managing a portfolio of solutions that are built for older organizational structures that probably won't exist in the future, and they are struggling to communicate ROI. There is so much bloat in the security market, to your point, Jill, that there are VCs that are actually backing software tools that help measure the ROI of other software tools. I think, one thing I'm really interested in is just looking for comprehensive solutions that can adapt to leaner organizations and that can help CISOs meet that growing demand. We've certainly made a few of those investments in our portfolio. I'm happy to talk about that, at a later point.
All right. But Eric, I want to go back to the point that Koryak had made in terms of these emerging technologies where it just creates data. Data begets data at the end of the day. I'm sure that there are many out there that have been eager to capitalize on privacy and data laws because of that. How are you seeing that environment evolve because of this data that's only just going to exponentially get bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. The emerging technologies are far outpacing the regulations right now. So that creates one issue. The second issue is that these new, the plaintiff's bar is really good at being creative and taking new technologies and applying them to sometimes decades old laws that clearly were not drafted with these emerging technologies in mind. However, these laws can come with things like high statutory damages, private rights of action, and just make them the perfect tool for the plaintiff's bar to really grasp onto the explosion of the consumer's consciousness of privacy issues, and also that exponential growth of data, like you said.
Yeah. So, Christine, when we think about these emerging technologies and how they are evolving so quickly, when you think about where you want to make investments, what are some examples of companies, to your point earlier, that are looking to fulfill that bird's eye view of the software that's going to return that investment?
Yeah, so I really appreciate Koryak's earlier point about supply chain, right? And there are growing government mandates around securing the supply chain, not just physical infrastructure, but in the software supply chain as well, right? So the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, now has government mandates around what is called the Software Bill of Materials. SBOMs. Sorry, I know I'm dropping a lot of acronyms on this call, but the way to think about SBOMs is they're functionally they're nutrition facts, right, for your software, right? So The same way where you're able to look at nutrition facts for the cereal you had this morning, you're able to now, the government is actually now kind of imposing those types of measures for anybody that is using software as part of their product development and manufacturing process. And an example of that is actually the FDA is starting to mandate SBOMs for all medical devices because of the rise of cold vulnerabilities in things like pacemakers. So we have invested in a company called Kusari, which is a platform that acts like a GPS for navigating software issues. They are helping chief security officers understand the software risks that they're facing and helping development operations engineers easily and automatically fix those issues. One of the things that we're anticipating with AI generated code, right, and an attack surface that's rapidly growing is you can't have security teams invest security issues after the fact, right? Like that model of incident response will no longer hold for the organizations of the future. And so we're really interested in comprehensive solutions that allow organizations to be proactive in auditing their software supply chain and remediating their issues proactively.
Yeah, and Koryak, it's interesting because when you think about the threat landscape and the threat actors, they are actually offering services. You have noted here ransomware as a service. So they're looking for solutions as well.
Yeah, for sure. But before that, maybe I would like to add one more thing to Christine's point because it's spot on. Because currently, the main reason behind the fact that supply chain is targeted this much is that the supply chain, the people managing the risks of supply chain with only checklists, still checklists, even though there are multiple solutions around which are looking at effectively measuring the risk score of supply chains, are still looking onto that from a governance perspective, which doesn't work. So that's, as a company, that's what we are striving to do as well, creating a more realistic model of measuring supply chain risk from a security perspective, not from a guideline or regulatory perspective, because it's obviously doesn't work. And coming back to your point, so first of all, I would like to also maybe expand the usage of AI. AI is not only used as us as security providers, the threat actors are utilizing AI very effectively. So we have seen that one of the most prominent examples of ransomware groups were using AI to basically making AI pick the most lucrative targets from their pool of already infected victims. They were making AI to choose, for example, which are the most attack worthy, which are the most vulnerable, which have the most percentage of likelihood in terms of their payment. In terms of as a service model, back to your question, yes, I mean, up to date, the ransomware as a service model was the biggest thing. And last year, we took part in one of the biggest multinational law enforcement operations globally on a particular threat actor group called Lockbit. And this group's feature was they were not themselves were basically attacking others, but they were providing the infrastructures to other threat actors who would like to take part in ransomware business. So they would basically provide you everything that you need in order to create your own ransomware enterprise. So this was the case up until this point. But in the future, they recognize that this as a service model has a tendency to grow exponentially while getting attention of law enforcement. So we expect this model to decline. We expect most of these actors to go more underground and increase their operational security and engaging in more closed operations, more professionally as small teams.
So, I mean, it adds just another layer of complexity for people within the cyberspace and for the enterprise overall, Eric, and another layer of complexity. You'd mentioned plaintiffs bar before, and of course, we're pretty litigious here in the US. Regulators are increasingly focusing on privacy and other areas of consumer data. So governance certainly plays a role within the enterprise, but you had mentioned before that laws that are on the books that might not necessarily be appropriate for the times that we live in now. I mean, HR, that's another thing if you use AI for HR reasons, or if you're using AI for lending, right? It might adhere to older laws on the book, but they're still there to serve as guidelines. Are legislators catching up with the type of technologies that like AI that is really changing the cyberspace in front of our eyes as we speak right now? This conversation could look very different 6 months from now. Are legislators doing enough?
Yeah, absolutely. They're trying, and they're doing their best to catch up rapidly. And we see this all the way from the municipal level all the way through federal as well. So this is not something that is stuck solely at the state level. The state privacy laws are getting a lot of publicity right now because the privacy compliance landscape has changed dramatically as the U.S. has imported principles from GDPR and European privacy and security principles and applied them with a kind of American flavor, which includes litigation, as you alluded to. But in addition to those generally applicable privacy laws, there are many industry specific or data specific laws as well that are creating this kind of mosaic across the United States that a lot of times it's complicated and it's very nuanced to determine which laws apply or some preempted, who is going to take precedence. And so it's very tricky right now to try to address all of these sometimes contradictory privacy and security laws at the same time that you're implementing new exciting technology.
Well, Eric, and what's interesting too, even if you want to think about it from global standardization as an example, because most companies that everyone's dealing with on this panel here operates in a global capacity, the way that we fundamentally view privacy, right, as in the US, it's very fundamental, the framework, of what our country's about. And that really does present an interesting layer, a little bit more of an existential conversation, but to get that global standardization because of how we fundamentally view data, privacy, and speech is very different than other areas of the world.
It absolutely is. And that comes up most often in the cross-border data transfer context where other countries have expressed doubts as to America's ability to protect data and especially the government's ability to access and request data that is stored in the United States. And so getting onto a single framework or getting closer to a single framework internationally has huge implications for the types of companies that we work with, which, I mean, in 2024, most businesses of any substantial size are doing business, at least in a couple of jurisdictions, if not truly on a worldwide basis. And so that harmonization is very difficult.
Yeah. And Christine, when you're working with your portfolio companies and you're thinking about different government mandates and so forth, does that present a challenge for them as well?
It's certainly something that we are well prepared to navigate, right? My fund, we focus on investing in dual use technologies. So we invest in technologies that scale with the help of government. And so oftentimes where we see opportunity, right, is companies that are able to help organizations meet the growing mandates on the government side.
Yeah, which is encouraging to hear that it's not just exclusively on the technology and the next hot product, but focusing on risk and governance and so forth. I mean, you really can't do one without the other at the end of the day. So, yeah. Koryak, to wrap up here, when you think about the future of what this landscape is going to look like, what are your thoughts?
I mean, unless we stop normalizing paying for ransomware isn't going anywhere. Yes, there are some things in motion currently. For example, yesterday, UK and Australia added some individuals to their list of sanctioned individuals, making very difficult to pay the ransom to them. And I'm seeing that more law enforcement agencies and governmental bodies will be pushing to make it more and more difficult to pay the ransom, so the ransomware will not be a normal part of our life. The thing that is most interesting is we've seen actors who are out of Russian Federation started cooperating with Chinese zero-day, which means zero-day vulnerability market, which emphasizes a cooperation between the underground culture of two different countries, creating even a bigger risk. And in my previous, when you also consider the fact that these ransomware groups are going more underground, increasing their operational security, we're going to be facing more and more complex attacks which will be very, very difficult to stop unless we adopt a more realistic approach towards security rather than a regulatory perspective.
All right. Appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.